Ask who was mining copper in New Zealand hundreds of years ago, and the honest answer arrives very fast indeed. Nobody was. That is not a hedge or a technicality. Copper mining in New Zealand has a start date, and it is recent. In 1844, a man named Alexander Kinghorn and his miners were working manganese ore on Great Barrier Island when they came across copper, found by accident, as so much of it is. And the discovery led to workings on Kauai Island, north of Auckland. Kauai became one of the country's earliest mining ventures of any kind. A company put up something like £23,000 to build a village at what is now Mansion House Bay, a manager's house, a street of workers' cottages, a jetty. At its height, the island held up to 300 people, a good many of them Cornish, carrying a mining tradition from the other side of the planet. It did not last, and the sea is what finished it. Most of the workings ran below sea level and had to be pumped constantly. The mine was inundated in 1852, and the copper operation closed in 1855, having produced somewhere around 3,000 tons. The stone ruins of the pump house and the smelting house are still there on the shoreline. That is the whole history of early New Zealand copper, and it spans about 11 years in the middle of the 19th century. Roughly 180 years ago, not hundreds. And before Europeans arrived, there was no metal mining in New Zealand at all. None. Māori worked no copper, no iron, no bronze, no gold. There was no smelting, no forge, no metallurgy of any kind anywhere in the country before contact. That is not a gap in the record. It is the record itself, and among the people who study it, there is no dispute about it at all. So the question, as asked, has no answer, because it contains the wrong material. But turn it very slightly. Ask instead, who was extracting stone from the ground in New Zealand hundreds of years ago? On what scale? And with what skill? And it stops being a dead end and becomes one of the most impressive industrial stories in the Pacific. Because the answer is, Māori were, at scale, from enormous quarries, using a rock-breaking technique that would be recognized instantly by an ancient miner on the other side of the world, and shipping the product the length of the country. Begin with what they were actually after, because it explains the enormous effort that went into getting it. New Zealand also presented its first settlers with a particular problem. Aotearoa is a large, geologically varied country, and the stone that matters is not distributed evenly across it. The best adze rock and the best glass and the greenstone all occur in specific, widely separated places. Most of them a long way from most people. In a world without metal, the entire working edge of a society, the adzes that shaped canoes and houses, the chisels, the knives, comes out of stone. And stone is not interchangeable. A society that depends on it needs particular rock with particular properties, and the good stuff is only in certain places. So you go to those places and you dig. The most important was pakohi, the metamorphosed argillite of the Nelson and Marlborough region at the top of the South Island. This is an indurated mudstone, and Māori valued it precisely for its strength, its hardness, and its ability to take and hold a sharpened edge, which made it superb for adzes, the single most important tool in a woodworking culture that built ocean-going canoes. They quarried it in the hills behind what is now Nelson City, and above all at Rangitoto ki Taonga, D'Urville Island, which holds huge quarries where pakohe was cut out of the land. These were not a scatter of casual collecting spots. They were extraction sites that worked so heavily and for so long that they reshaped the hillsides themselves. Then there is obsidian, volcanic glass, called mata, which flakes to an edge sharper than surgical steel. The finest in the country came from Tuhua, Maya Island, a small volcanic island in the Bay of Plenty, and there was basalt from Taonga in the Coromandel, another prized adze stone, and then, above all of them in value, pounamu, New Zealand greenstone, a nephrite jade found in the rivers and rock of the South Island's west coast. Pounamu is one of the toughest natural materials on Earth. It does not flake obligingly like flint. It has to be sawn, ground, drilled and polished with abrasives and water, a process that can take weeks or months for a single object. It became the most precious substance in the Māori world, made into adzes, weapons like the mere, and treasured ornaments carrying names, histories and mana across generations. It is worth saying that these were not merely resource sites in the industrial sense. Pounamu, in particular, sits inside a body of tradition and authority. It belongs to place and to people. Its sources are known and held, and Ngai Tahu's relationship with the Greenstone country is a living one recognized in New Zealand law today. Access was never simply a matter of turning up with tools. Who could take stone from where and on what terms was governed by relationships between communities long before any European set foot on the coast. 4 materials, 4 regions, each with its own geology, each requiring people to travel to it, work it, and carry it home. That is not foraging. That is an extraction industry with a map. Now, the detail that ought to stop anyone who has ever read about ancient mining anywhere else in the world. To break pakohe out of the rock face, Maori quarry workers lit fires against the stone. They burned them until the rock was thoroughly hot, and then they threw water on it. The physics of it is simple and merciless. Rock heats unevenly and expands unevenly, mineral by mineral. Chill the hot surface suddenly, and it contracts while the interior is still swollen, and the stone tears itself apart, cracking, spalling, shedding slabs and flakes to a depth of inches. What was solid becomes broken, and broken rock can be worked by hand. That technique is called fire setting, and it is one of the oldest and most effective pieces of mining engineering humans have ever devised. It was used in the ancient old world. It was used in European mines right up until explosives replaced it. And it was used, entirely independently, by ancient copper miners on Isle Royale in Lake Superior, half a planet away, who broke volcanic bedrock the same way to reach native copper. That last comparison is worth sitting with for a moment, because the two cases could hardly be less alike in their particulars. Isle Royale is a cold island in a freshwater sea in the northern hemisphere, and the miners there were after pure native copper in volcanic bedrock, thousands of years ago. The Nelson quarries are in the subtropics of the southern hemisphere. The target is a hard mudstone, and the work is far more recent. Different hemispheres, different centuries, different rock, different prizes. Nobody carried that idea to New Zealand. There was no contact. Two peoples, separated by the largest ocean on Earth, working on completely different rocks for completely different purposes, arrived at the same solution. Because it is the correct solution, and because attentive people working stone with fire available will eventually notice what heat and water do to it. The rest of the toolkit was just as considered. To break up smaller boulders, they used hammerstones, and they were selective about them. granodiorite cobbles and pebbles chosen for hardness and heft, some weighing as much as 25 kilograms, carried up to the quarries from the boulder bank at Nelson. Think about that specific act. Somebody assessed the stone available on a beach, judged which cobbles would survive the work, and hauled them, a load like a full sack of cement, uphill to the quarry, because the tool had to be harder than the target. And the work did not end at the quarry face. Broken rock is not a tool. The stone had to be assessed for flaws, roughed out into preforms, blanks of roughly the right shape, light enough to be worth carrying, and only then ground and polished into finished adzes, which is slow work with sandstone and water. Quarry sites are littered with the evidence of this triage. Pieces started and abandoned when a hidden crack revealed itself. The whole sequence of decisions preserved in the debris. That is quarry engineering, material selection, transport logistics, staged processing, and a rock-breaking method that stayed state-of-the-art worldwide until dynamite. An industry is not only extraction, it is distribution as well, and this is where the true scale of the thing becomes clear. Obsidian from Tuhua, that one small island in the Bay of Plenty, turns up in great quantities at sites across the whole country, dated to the first centuries of settlement, roughly the mid-13th to the 15th century. Volcanic glass carries a sharp chemical fingerprint, which is why archaeologists can say that, with confidence, they can match a flake from a distant site back to its source island. The evidence indicates the ancestors of Māori were accessing it directly, going to get it. Pakohe from the Nelson quarries moved widely too. In that early period, finished stone tools and raw material were being transferred between neighbouring regions as a matter of course, alongside long-distance movement of the most valued stone, obsidian and meta-argillite in particular, travelling far beyond the districts that produced them. And then the pattern changes, which is the most interesting detail of all. Over time, the widespread movement of North Island obsidian gives way to inter-island exchange in objects made from South Island pounamu. The network did not decay. It repointed itself toward the material that had become most valuable, and greenstone travelled north across Cook Strait to be worked, worn, gifted, and inherited. Consider what that required in practice. Sea crossings in canoes, including Cook Strait, which is not a forgiving stretch of water. Knowledge of where the sources were, held and transmitted across generations. Relationships between distant communities are stable enough that people and goods could move along them. And a shared sense of value strong enough that a stone from one end of the country was worth the journey from the other. That is a functioning national exchange system, built and run without writing, without the wheel, without draft animals, and without metal, in a country the length of Italy, split by a strait. The change also says something about what these societies were becoming. Obsidian is a working material. You use it, it dulls, you flake another edge. Pounamu is the opposite, durable, almost beyond wearing out, difficult enough to work that a finished piece represents an enormous investment of labour, and therefore ideal as something to keep, to name, and to hand on. A network shifting its centre of gravity from the first kind of stone to the second is a network carrying less raw utility and more meaning. So let us put the whole answer together, plainly. Nobody mined copper in New Zealand hundreds of years ago. Copper mining there is a European industry that starts in the 1840s at Kawau, runs about a decade, drowns below the waterline, and leaves ruins on a beach. And no earlier people preceded Maori to do it. The archaeology of New Zealand's settlement is consistent and well studied. The ancestors of Maori arrived from East Polynesia around the 13th century, and there is no evidence of any people here before them. The occasional claim otherwise has never produced anything that survives examination, and it has always served the same purpose: taking an achievement from the people who actually made it and handing it to somebody imaginary. But hundreds of years ago, in that country, people were absolutely mining. They were opening large quarries into hillsides. They were breaking rock with fire and water in a technique that outlasted every alternative until explosives. They were selecting and hauling 25-kilogram hammerstones uphill because the job demanded a harder tool. And they were moving the product across a whole archipelago through a durable exchange network. They simply were not doing it for metal, because there was no useful metal to be had, and because the material they prized above everything else was harder to work than copper ever was. Pounamu will blunt and defeat tools that would cut soft metal easily, and working a single piece properly demands patience measured in weeks and months rather than hours. A society capable of that is not a society waiting for metallurgy to arrive and rescue it. And that is the thing worth carrying away, because the assumption buried in the original question is a common one, and it is worth digging out. We tend to use metal as the yardstick of technological seriousness. Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, as though every society were climbing the same staircase and could be ranked by which step it had reached. It is a poor measure. It rates whole societies by the resources their ground happened to contain, rather than by the ingenuity and skill they brought to whatever they actually had. New Zealand had no workable copper deposits for a pre-industrial society to find. What it had was superb stone, and Maori built an entire material culture on it: ocean-going canoes, carved houses, tools, weapons and taonga. Supported by quarries, engineering, logistics and trade of a kind any mining district would recognize. There is a practical version of this worth remembering. When you meet a place that appears to have no technological history, check first whether you are looking for the wrong evidence. Metalworking leaves slag, furnaces, and corroded objects, distinctive, easy to spot, unmistakable. Stone extraction leaves quarry faces that look like hillsides, flake scatters that look like gravel, and finished tools that look like rocks unless you know what you are holding. One kind of industry announces itself, the other has to be recognized. So the question is not who was mining copper in New Zealand hundreds of years ago. It is why we assume that the people who left no slag heaps were not mining at all. Go and look at the hillsides on D'Urville Island. The quarries are still there, and they are enormous, and they were opened with fire and water and stone by people who never once needed a metal tool to do it.